Hello and welcome to another episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Haskin, and today I am doing something that I've kind of wanted to do for a long time. It's a bit unprecedented for the show, but we're doing a roundtable panel discussion on a subject that I know almost nothing about. So I'm not going to be very helpful, but I'm sure that all of my guests are. I'd like to welcome them. Two of them have been on the show before. Our first time guest is Derek, and then we have John from the Deep Purple Podcast, and of course, Juli Gort, who has been on the show recently with a wonderful cover album that she has just completed with her husband, John, another just awesome musician. How are you guys doing today?
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, great.
Fantastic.
Cool. Well, welcome to the show, guys. I'm going to have you each introduce yourselves and talk about like what your connection is to our subject, which is kind of the rise and fall of grunge music. And I'll just start out by saying the reason that I know almost nothing about it is because I heard a couple songs that I thought, okay, these are cool. I like these songs. And the rest of what I heard, I just never really connected with. I didn't find songs that I really felt had an emotional tie to them. They were kind of just almost emotionless. And I'm thinking of bands like Soundgarden, which the songs that I became familiar with were just very straightforward, almost like, I'm paid to sing these words, so that's what I'm going to do, instead of I'm singing a story that I feel, or here's what happened to me and why I need to share this. So I disconnected with it very early, and I honestly don't think that I gave it a fair shot because of that. I'm sure there's songs out there that I would absolutely love if I knew what to listen to. So I'm hoping to kind of learn some stuff from you guys today. Juli, I want to start with you because you lived there during all this. I mean, you were right in the middle of it, and you're a guitar player. So you probably have some interesting insight as to how this all came about. Just give us an idea of who you are for newer listeners, and let us know what your initial connection to grunge was.
Okay. I'm going to probably talk in a circle here, but so I started learning guitar in the 80s. And I'm just a big fan of instrumental rock guitar, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Eric Johnson. And when I initially moved to the Pacific Northwest, I started an instrumental trio because that was my passion and what I was into. And I would say our style was prog rock, in the vein of my heroes. And here we are coming about in this age of grunge. So I'm not an expert in grunge, although I was working at Tower Records when everything sort of exploded. Before I left, we were just getting Alice in Chains, Man in the Box, then Nirvana. So, I saw the debut album from Pearl Jam. I saw all these things exploding during that time. So I was kind of going against the grain. That's kind of what was happening in my world.
And I've known you since high school, and I've seen you play or listened to you play many times, and I can say you definitely have the chops to be able to hold up to those heroes of yours.
Oh, thank you.
I was listening to Satriani play just the other day the song "War," which was a favorite of mine, and man, the song is like really simple, but at the same time it's really intricate. And I just love the forward motion of it. And when Satriani just adds his little flavor into it, it just, you couldn't ask for more, but you've definitely got the chops to keep up with those guys.
Thank you.
Sure.
Means a lot.
John, this whole idea was yours. You came to me a while ago, and thank you guys all for hanging in there with the scheduling. I know it's been a little difficult trying to get the four of us in the same place at the same time. John, how did you come up with this idea? And of course, I want to say too, you're from the Deep Purple podcast. We've got a couple of episodes reviewing Toys in the Attic coming up after this episode airs, which I'm really excited to do. That was a fun episode. What is your connection to grunge music, and why are you doing a Deep Purple podcast?
Well, to answer your first question, I'm pretty sure that I came up with the idea or the concept. I can't remember if I had was talking to Derek and our other friend about it, Eric, maybe 6 or 7 months ago. I think we saw each other, which was the first time we'd seen each other in quite a while. And we were going to a show, and on the car ride, I was, I feel like I was talking about this idea. And, we'd always, Derek and I grew up together. So I want to kind of qualify that. We started, we went to school with like starting in seventh grade. So we've known each other for years. So we, I feel like we have different, kind of differing opinions on it, because I was very hard and fast in my music taste. It's like, this is it and nothing else. I'm a little more understanding these days, but we started batting around this conversation, in the car, and it was, these guys have always loved to talk music and, come up with a lot of great points and, kind of debatable topic, respectfully, of course. And I was just like, wow, this is, as kind of stimulating as I thought it would be. Like, this would make a great, show, because it's something that, I've kind of talked to Nate about doing, but it's not really in our wheelhouse on our podcast, maybe as a bonus episode or something, but it's something that I haven't really heard a lot of podcasts talk about, especially because I'm, very similar taste of music to Juli, and she was talking about, I was talking to one of my friends about the first kind of like instrumental guitarist I like was Satriani, because a guy at a record store had introduced me to him. But my tastes were like glam metal when I first started listening to music. So that was exactly the type of music that, at the time, whether I thought so or whether I thought so because everybody was telling me, was what killed my favorite music or made it less popular. So that's why I had a disdain for grunge. Or at the time, I don't even think we called it grunge back then. I think it was just called alternative music. Which once it became popular, that was kind of a moot point. You can't call it alternative anymore because it became so big. But at the time, I loathed it. I couldn't stand it. And but I mean, in the coming years, with maturity and growing musically, even though I still love the same bands and listen to the same music primarily that I always did, I can understand that it's music that, as you said earlier, Scott, that I just never connected with. And, had I given it a chance, or if I did now, I would probably find something in there that I enjoy.
Yeah, I find that, by, I think, the mid 80s, because I was born in 72, and by the mid 80s, I think I had locked in the majority of bands that I really wanted to pursue. And these are the bands that I'm going to listen to on a regular basis. And I kind of started closing myself off, I think, to new music. Whereas when MTV first came out, every video I wanted to see it. Who's this band? What's this song? I was really excited. But by the mid 80s, I'd kind of dialed it in, like, these are my bands. And by the time that grunge came out, or like you said, alternative, I feel like I wasn't really open to anything new, and then not really loving what I did hear right off the bat. I think it just kind of turned me off to it. I mean, there were some really good songs. Obviously, Smells Like Teen Spirit was a huge hit right off the bat. Even Flow by Pearl Jam was another one that was really good. I'm thinking more like the slower songs like Plush. And I was in a band that played that song, and as the drummer, I mean, I might as well be playing country music from the 40s. There's just nothing in a song like that for a drummer. Derek, how about you?
Yeah. So as John said, he and I have known each other since seventh grade. And it's funny, at that point, my tastes were probably more aligned with John's, kind of early on, definitely in that realm of glam and hair metal and that type of stuff. And it's funny, and I was actually trying to find online if I could confirm the specific memory I have around that transition point between kind of hair metal and grunge. And in my head, at least, I remember watching like a good little headbanger, watching Headbangers Ball on MTV, late at night. And I think the last video of the night, Ricky Rockman saying something like, hey, we're going to close out with this new video from this new band called Pearl Jam. I hear that it seems like there's a really cool scene happening up there. We're going to keep an eye on it. So here's, one last new video, Pearl Jam. And I remember sitting there and kind of being like, after watching however long Headbangers Ball was, 2 hours of like, teased out hair and spandex and the whole thing and bright lights. And all of a sudden, here comes this black and white performance video of these guys just, stage diving and like this very kind of grungy, very elemental type of thing. And me sitting there going, all that other stuff is really cool. this is also cool, but in a completely different manner, right? I kind of dug it. And for me, I always straddled both of those. And for me, unlike the three of you, I'm not a musician. I am just a huge music geek. I've seen over 250 bands and artists live, tons of concerts. And I'm a bit wonky in that case in terms of like, I keep a spreadsheet of every show I've ever been to. And I actually, out of curiosity, I went back and I did a quick sort, and I literally looked at all the artists I've seen. I typed hair or 90s next to each one of them and did a quick sort. And I've seen almost exactly the same number of bands from kind of each group, right? And so, during that grunge era, when John and I and our other friend Eric and others, kind of high school and post-high school, were kind of in our prime concert-going period, honestly, probably saw more hair metal bands in that period than technically some of those other bands, right? Some of the 90s bands, and some of those grunge and alternative bands. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, damn, I missed a chance to see, Pearl Jam at the first Lollapalooza or something like that. But I get to say that I saw some really cool bands, at other venues and stuff. So that's my kind of connection to grunge and kind of being in both camps of still to this day. I love Pearl Jam 10. I also love listening to some good old Poison and Motley Crue as well. So I'm happy listening to both.
I like that you said that, because I feel like at least a lot of what I see in social media and a lot of what I remember from people being in high school is people feel like they have to stay in a certain lane. Like, I'm a rocker, or I'm a country guy, or I'm a rapper, or whatever. And I don't see why we're so closed off to saying, you know what? I listen to a lot of rock and roll, but I like some pop. I like some country. I like a couple rap songs. I've never understood why we've needed to identify ourselves that way and really pigeonhole. So I really like that we have some varied tastes, that we're open to different things. I remember when my brother played some Busta Rhymes for me, I'm like, why are you listening to Busta Rhymes? And then the song he played for me, I'm like, holy crap, this is a great song. I don't understand what he's saying. I think I picked out 3 words in this whole song that I could understand, but I love the rhythm of it. I love the feel of it. They were using the Psycho Suite from the movie, the creepy strings, which I really liked. But it was just an amazing song. And then I started listening to more of that, and I'm like, wow, this is great. And I joined a country band for a while and started listening to some of that, and really opened up to. So I really hate that we often feel that we have to do that. So I'm very glad to see that you guys all have some really good, varied tastes in music. In the opening, I kind of alluded to the fact that I think I've really misjudged this genre of music. Juli, what do you think that I'm not seeing, or do you see things the same way that I do, that it's a lot of just, I'm singing because I'm supposed to sing and not because I'm feeling this story and want to share it with you?
Though, I was just, thinking of this whole conversation and how, being rooted in the 80s, everything about the recordings in the 80s, as we got to 88, 89, it's almost like everything was quantized to a click. All the delay was quantized to the click. Yeah. Everything was pristine and perfect. And even some people weren't even playing on their own albums because they had the studio musicians wanting to play it perfect, and they would take hundreds of takes. I heard about Mariah Carey, all the slices of the tape on the cutting room floor, because they literally had to get everything perfect. And then here comes this grunge where that just went out the window. I think it was a reaction. Just let's try to be raw and let's try to be emotive. And I think I feel like that's what I got from it, was like, this is a whole new expression. People want the raw, they want the emotion. And so that's kind of what I was hearing in it. So the fact that you didn't hear that, I think that was a little strange, but maybe because it was so diverse from what we were used to,
I think it was maybe particular songs that I heard, thinking about songs maybe. like Plush and maybe more the Soundgarden kind of thing. Like I really did not, I like his voice, but I really just did not like a lot of the songs that I heard from Soundgarden. And that is one of the main bands that defines that time for me. And I think it was because I heard them early on, I kind of felt like I just don't care for this music very much. And when I heard Nirvana, I didn't really see them as that same thing. I didn't feel like they were part of it because their songs were the songs I knew, like In Bloom or Smells Like Teen Spirit, were like real energy and, a lot of emotion and stuff going on, vocals that I felt like he was singing from his soul, as opposed to Soundgarden, where I'm like,
Soundgarden. I did.
Really?
Because I feel
same here.
they were playing in 5/4. They were playing altered tunings on the guitar.
Mhm.
Chris Cornell really was expressive to me, but maybe it didn't come across to you.
Yeah, it didn't. And it could, and a lot of times too, and I have to be fair, it could be the mood you're in, what's going on in your life, what kind of day you're having the first time you hear something. And if you're just not receptive in that moment that you first experience something, that's kind of an automatic, you're really fighting an uphill battle to get me to like it right off the bat, right? So I have to be fair and say that there may well have been an element of that. But other songs like Even Flow, I absolutely loved. I thought that was a great song. And I didn't equate it with the same kind of music because it didn't have that. Like, I just assumed, I think, that all that music was emo and just, I want to be depressed and share that with you, when I don't really think that was a fair assessment.
Yeah, I would encourage you to listen to more. I think maybe my advantage was that working at the record store, they would put the record on, it would play it in its entirety, and then we'd be on to the next one. So I was just constantly bombarded with every single song on every single album. So when you're exposed over and over, then it kind of starts to set in.
Oh, absolutely. Until your brain just tunes out the music in the room. Like when I worked at Pro Sound Music, I could walk by some guy banging away on a drum set or somebody wailing on a guitar and not even hear it, because my mind was just like, you don't need to pay attention to this, unless it was Smoke on the Water, and then I would stop. But and Julie too, I played in a band for a little while with Greg Chavez from Colorado Springs, who I think you know. And we were doing like really progressive jazz fusion type stuff. And there was a song that we were working on, and we were kind of like, we can never play this on stage. It's just dead. It's like, it's interesting, but it's just dead. It has no energy. And I started thinking about bands like Soundgarden. I'm like, how do they do a show? Does everyone like show up and they just kind of stand there and look at each other and go, eh?
No, it would be a frenzy.
Yeah.
Soundgarden shows. It was like nuts at some of those.
Well, John, since you kind of had the same shut off to it initially, how do you feel about it now? Are you able to go back and listen to some of those songs and go, yeah, I really wish I would have been listening to this earlier?
I kind of haven't tried. I guess you could say that, like, at first, like whatever it was 30 years ago, I was angry at it, and now I'm just kind of indifferent to it. I think that Nate and I joke around about, if something grunge comes up on the podcast, I'm always like, boo, and it's like, I ham it up, but it's not really, he just knows it's not my music. So I'm like, well, let me see if I could listen to some, I don't know. I think I put on Nirvana or something. And I was like, I just couldn't really make it through a couple of songs. I'm like, turned it off. I will say, like, some of that, like, post grunge stuff, what's the name, like Audio Slave, I actually listened to years after the fact. I don't know if maybe a song came on, maybe it was like Sirius Radio, or somebody played it, and I was like, oh, let me check this out, and I actually thought it was really good, for whatever reason. Maybe that just hit me, but at the time, that music never really, and it still doesn't really resonate with me. If I listen to it, if I gave it a fair shake, like if one of you guys said, like, here's the best of, like, early 90s grunge, like, compilation or something, like, listen to it, which somebody did that to me with the Beatles. They're just like, here's my Beatles playlist, because the Beatles had never been another one that really connected with me either. So I'm like, I know some of their songs, but I'm not like, and and I found some on there. Oh, this is pretty good. And it's hard, to hear, like, maybe a Beatles song you haven't heard at this point, but for alternative songs, grunge songs, whatever, I'm sure there's a lot that I haven't, but I've heard all this stuff that was on the radio, and to me, my perception at the time is that it was just a bunch of mopey, teenagers, 20 somethings dressing down and just being depressed. And that was the messaging coming from like my side anyways. So it was in stark contrast to everything that I was getting into, which was really, like image oriented, fashionable, exciting. And I was just been into Kiss for only a couple of years. And I mean, they're one of the most theatrical bands, that there were. Even the first show that I went to, which, Derek was there with me, was Kiss in '92, which was, as I found out years later, was probably one of their worst attended tours of like, the past 10 years at that point. But I mean, to me, it was like, fantastic, for all I knew at the time, it was like their most successful tour. But, it's, that was the world that I was living in. It was like, it just went in contrast to everything that I loved, or that I like kind of, pictured myself being or listening to, or something that got me excited, because there was no theatricality about it. There was nothing exciting in the music or the image, or that made me want to go see shows or buy the albums. It was just, it really kind of, it depressed me. So I'm just like, meh. So I just kind of tuned out from it. And
I can understand that. I think for me, thinking about songs like Black Hole Sun, for example, I really wanted to like that song. I mean, everybody I knew was like, oh, this song's great, you got to check it out. And there's some things about the production I love. I love the guitar sound on that song. But what I didn't get was, I just didn't get enough from the singer. And I thought this song could be really good if he could make me feel what he was singing about. And coming from the bands that I grew up listening to, like Deep Purple and Rainbow and Whitesnake and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, when I listen to those guys, I feel the stories that they're singing. Their singers are very good about drawing me in, even though I'm not a lyric guy. Like, I really look at the vocals more as an instrument and almost don't care what the story is. If I can just get something out of the feel of the vocals, then that will make me feel whatever they're saying. But with that, I couldn't get there. And I think, like I said, that was an initial turnoff, and it just kind of killed my desire to really dig into it further. I'm like, why do I want to waste my time listening to music that I already know I can't feel, instead of being really open and giving it a chance,
Well, the other interesting thing too is that a lot of these bands at the time, like I was reading, magazines, Guitar World, like, Hit Parade or whatever, they were listing like Black Sabbath, Kiss, like all sorts of bands that I liked as their influences. So you would think like, oh, well, I should love these guys, and it's like, and they did do stuff that influenced them from those bands, but it didn't, it kind of wasn't enough. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I kind of respected them for that, but it didn't translate into me like, kind of generating any interest,
Right.
So,
right. Derek, how about you? When you first started to really dig into it, what were the bands that were the bands that were doing it for you?
It's funny. Nirvana always gets mentioned as, the one that really broke through and stuff. And to be honest with you, for me, in the list of those bands, Nirvana is not at the top. Like, I don't want to just go as far as saying I think they're overrated, but I could probably make them, I could probably go there. For me, I think it's always been, I always felt like, oh, I get the break in the sound from where we were in rock and roll to where they came in. But I always felt like, I don't think it kind of felt like a little punkish and like some other things. Like, it felt like I could really make some direct connections to some things previously not completely new and inventive. So actually for me, I'm a huge Pearl Jam fan. They were one that really did it for me. I did like Soundgarden, but not a ton. I probably have liked them more as time has gone on. I did see them live at probably one of the most 90s lineups ever, which was Blind Melon, Soundgarden, and Neil Young. You basically had to wear flannel to get into the door. And they were great. They were great live. And that was just before Super Unknown came out. So they were still kind of like underground and like not quite breaking through. And then, Super Unknown came out, and Black Hole Sun and My Wave and all those things just absolutely blew up for them. Alice in Chains was one that probably, I would say Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains were the two that feel like the most, that really did it for me the most. And what's interesting about those two, I would make the argument that those two probably have the most connection to the kind of the heavy metal and rock from the 80s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, Pearl Jam 10 is basically an arena rock album with more mumbly lyrics, right? I mean, it's great guitar, it's great tunes, right? It's a great album in that regard. And then Alice in Chains, I mean, they're heavy. And when you think about those four bands, and then you say, yep, that's all the same music. It's kind of crazy to think that they all got lumped together, because Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Soundgarden, I mean, they all had very distinct and different sounds, and yet they all got really put into that one grouping. But I loved Alice in Chains, still like them to this day. And they were one that really like caught my attention and liked listening to them a lot.
Was it maybe a case that everything that was coming out of Seattle at that time was just going to be labeled alternative or grunge just because of the time and location of it?
Yeah. And like, it's funny, I completely think that's it. And you mentioned Plush a few times from Stone Temple Pilots. Yeah.
Oh, Stone Temple Pilots. I'm sorry. I had that wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, Plush from Stone Temple Pilots, and that first album, I think I still like that album. It's an album that for me, for Stone Temple Pilots, I listen to with nostalgia. Their other albums I listen to, and I think that they still hold up. And I think they got completely just pigeonholed. They're like, oh, look at their grunge, and they got put into that grouping. And honestly, I think if that album had come out probably a few years later, they would have been probably they could have been thrown into some of the hair metal mix, right? I mean, with a heavier, deeper end, but they got caught up in that. I think over the years they managed to break away from that a bit. And like I said, some of their later albums I think still hold up really, really well to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to apologize to Stone Temple Pilots. I was in a band and played that song, and I couldn't remember who did it. So that shows how disconnected I am from this whole thing. Either that or I'm getting old. So I'll be in the corner turning to dust if you guys want to finish the podcast. Juli, you mentioned the production, and you're absolutely right. I feel like that was one of those times where they were starting to get back to almost the way that punk kind of came in from disco and said, you know what, we just need to be raw and natural and record that instead of everything having to be so perfect. I think that we were also kind of, our ears were just getting tired of that 80s production, the just the way that they were mixing things and mastering things at the time. I didn't know any better at the time until we started to get away from it. And I have to say, production wise, I do think that we had some great recordings of alternative bands, because obviously the technology was changing. They were starting to head towards digital. They were just using better equipment. And I think overall they were mixing things a lot better. So I think that helped maybe just sonically, but as you were watching this develop, I'm curious, what was going on in Seattle at the time as far as like local concerts and things like that? Because what we're talking about is really bands that made the mainstream, right? What was happening like around Seattle in the clubs?
Well, there was a shift, I could feel, but I moved in 91, and I started playing around in 92. But what I did find was there was room for what we were doing, which was so amazing. I mean, of course, undoubtedly every single show they'd say, why don't you have a singer? I'd have to explain. But I didn't play with any of the big people, but when there's big breakthroughs with a band like Nirvana, Soundgarden, there's going to be a bunch of people following that sound. But the community was so huge. We had wonderful places to play. Seattle was just loaded with these small clubs, and there'd be like 5 bands every weekend night. So it was really, really a fun time. There were festivals. We played a lot of outdoor summertime things, but I felt it was like camaraderie, acceptance. And how we were talking about in high school, I was like a rocker. I just had to be the rocker. I had to wear the jean jacket. That was the thing. New Kids on the Block. I would always boo them when they came on the top 20 video countdown because Bon Jovi had to be number 1 or whatever.
Right.
But kids these days, I'm a teacher, so they listen to everything with every single song at their fingertips. It's really cool and refreshing to see how varied their taste is and how they're into anything. Like, and one thing is they don't listen to whole albums. They pick one song here and one song there.
Mm-hmm.
The whole world has changed with the way we listen to music now. So it's cool. It's refreshing. There was room for me in that space, even though what I was doing was totally different, and I like to see this next generation open to many different things too.
I really like that. I like that kids are not taking the path that we did and just saying nope and not really giving things a fair chance. I'm really looking at you, John, and myself when I say that. But I think that's great. And I think also, and by the way, you're teaching at Berkeley. You're not just teaching, like you're teaching at one of the best places in the world to learn music, which is just awesome. I love that. But I love what you're seeing there from the kids, because it just gives me hope that they're not doing the pigeonholing thing that we did. And because music of all types can be wonderful and enjoyable, and there could be great songs in every type of music. There's disco I like I said, there's some rap songs I like and some country songs I like. And if you had asked me 20 years ago, I would have said, you're out of your mind if you ever thought I would ever listen to a rap artist. And I grew up in Detroit, so that was, kind of a thing there with Eminem and all.
One of my first records was Run DMC.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Very cool. But I also love the fact that it was just at least getting more open and raw. Like, we didn't have to be 100% on the beat. It just had to have that drive and just keep you zoned into it. And I take that back to the 70s, when a lot of those earlier rock bands were playing. They weren't playing to click tracks because click tracks didn't exist. And you can hear it. You can hear where they're supposed to stop at exactly the same time, but they're slightly off from each other. And I love it because it's more human. Yeah. And I feel like in a lot of ways in studio production, we've gone back to that 80s, everything has to be right on the beat thing again. They're fixing all these things in the studio, and it just doesn't feel as natural now. What do you think, John?
Yeah, that's something that we talk a lot about on my podcast is how, when especially like you've heard the isolated tracks episodes where we will listen to each individual track, and almost every time we're just like, oh, see, if they did that today, they would have taken it out, or they would have corrected it or fixed it. And then taking it as into account as a whole, we're just like, this is why this song is so great, because it's not 100% on, it's organic, and that comes through in the final product, even if you don't know why. And breaking the song down like that, I think helps you figure that out. But yeah, I do agree that like I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I like a lot of current stuff that I've heard. I mean, does it grab me the same way as like my music grabbed me like when I first heard it? No, but I mean, that's how things are changing. Like Juli said, there's, people listen to singles now instead of full albums, or they, cherry pick. And I mean, even I do it with like my old albums, I'll listen to playlists or a couple of songs here and there rather than full albums anymore, but that's because you can, but there was actually a couple of other points that I was thinking of when if I can go back to it, when Derek was talking about, I think one of the things that kind of like had me, when I pigeonholed grunge alternative music together is that when you don't know a genre of music, you think it's all the same. Because take a look at like, if you pick out like, Poison, Motley Crue, and Guns N' Roses, they're all under the same banner, but they're not the same kinds of bands. Like, I mean, anybody that knows that music knows that there are three distinctive types of bands. Oh, they're all hair metal. Not really. True. Not really. So, I mean, I think that in that same way, I was being unfair to those bands as well, because as Derek mentioned, like, it was really interesting that like, this band was considered, grunge or lumped in with all these because they're really not that style of music. They might be, in the broader sense, the same style, or came from the same place or whatever, maybe clicked off some of the boxes. But, I think that that's a prejudice that, stops some people from enjoying certain types of music. And I think it certainly did for me.
That's a really fair point. And I'm just realizing too how we do that with a lot of things in life. I mean, we do it with food. We say, well, I don't want to eat vegan, or, you know, we kind of generalize there. We generalize with race. I mean, we say, oh, the Russians attacked, or this group of people or whatever. We're so judgmental in general ways, when I'm sure if you met 5 Russians, they would probably be 5 completely different people, a couple that you'd like, a couple you'd be, and one jerk, you know, because you're going to get that combination with every race. And it's the same with bands, and it's the same with food and everything else. So that's a really interesting point. Let me ask you, Derek, as a non-musician, when you hear a song and everything is just perfect, and then you hear the whole album and everything is just perfect, do you feel that it sets a realistic portrayal of a band, or an unrealistic, like, I know they recorded this in a studio and I know that they just released something perfect, but what are they like live?
And you're talking about perfect because, like, from a production and performance standpoint?
Yeah, for mainly the performance. Like, there's no drums that are off time. Everything's just, they move perfectly together, like they're a synchronized swimming team.
Yeah, I think it's a great question as a non-musician, because I'm probably not going to notice that, but what I will notice is the feeling I get from that. And so if I'm listening to a punk band that has that level of perfection, I'm probably going to, like, just like my gut's going to tell me, like, there's something wrong here, right? Because I expect something more raw and more vital coming from this. But if I'm listening to something that's more, I expect to be more polished, EDM or something like that, if that is then suddenly starting to stray from, beats and rhythms and that type of stuff, that I'll probably notice more. So I think it really comes down to genre and expectations for me, that if the production is aligned with what I'm looking to kind of feel from the music, then that works for me, but I won't necessarily hear it on my own. That's one of the things I love hearing kind of musicians geek out about, production and about music, because they will bring things, make me notice things I just wouldn't notice on my own. Like, oh, that was a mess up there. I'm like, oh, I just thought that sounded kind of cool. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's for some reason, it makes me think about, and John and I have traded a few messages about this. Recently Aerosmith released a demo version of their first album, basically, and some unreleased demos and that type of stuff. And it's so interesting to hear that I'm sure with a musician's ear, you'd be hearing things all over the place that you can tell this was a bunch of drunk and drugged out guys in the 70s doing a rough take on some songs and stuff like that. To my ears as a music fan, I feel like if you took that album and you put it in front of a hipster in New York City and said that this was an underground band that's new and current, they would be like, this is awesome. Where can I hear them? Right? Because they sound so raw and so elemental. And so it's, I don't know, maybe it just falls into the category of no new ideas, but I think it also falls into the category of, that production and the music meeting those expectations. I think the other thing, coming back to kind of the hair metal and production and all those things, if you want to, see something really fun, read fans' reviews of basically the 3 big Def Leppard albums, and the progression of those fans of moving from, and I forget what the first one is, but all the way to Hysteria, right? Pyromania and then Hysteria. The fans that, like, those people that were with Def Leppard at the beginning, they don't like Hysteria, and yet that's their biggest album, right? And I think that's a great example of what Juli was talking about as production got better. And I think it also is indicative of kind of where metal and hair metal and like kind of that rock was heading, of so slick and so well produced that it turned some people off at that point. And so I just was looking at it the other day, some of the fan reviews of those albums, and I was kind of struck by, biggest album for the band, and yet so many of the people that like them were like, this is my least favorite album except for these 2 songs on it.
But it seems like when somebody's been following a band for a while and all of a sudden they hit some major commercial success, there's this, well, they sold out, or they're not the band that I knew, or they're not the band I want them to be. It's like musicians evolve as they learn, they experience things from not only their writing, but what they're listening to. If they're out playing live, their touring experiences, all those things are added to the mix and then brought to the next project. And then you add more and bring that to the next project. So bands are going to evolve. Like Metallica, for example, has evolved so many times. Or Uriah Heep is another one, because I've covered 307 songs of theirs on my other show. And I can tell you the band that they started out to be in 1969 and the band they are in 2022 is completely different, and they've morphed into so many things. But people tend to get very possessive of their favorite era of the band, which is usually whatever era they first came across. So if they found Uriah Heep in 1971, that's the band that they always want them to be. And I'm like, well, I get that, but bands are going to evolve. They're going to try different things. They also have to change with the times too. The music that's around today is going to be an influence. So there's so much that goes into that, but they do tend to get very possessive and say, it's not what I want the band to be, and they're my band, so I should have a say. Well, I'm sorry, but you can't stop nature from evolving things, Juli, I'll throw that question to you because you're dealing with a lot of aspiring musicians of all different levels. Do you think that this polished kind of music that we're listening to now, and I could kind of equate it to modeling, right? Like a young girl will watch, like maybe she wants to model or be in pageants or something, and she'll watch these people that have been doing it for a while and their bodies are absolutely perfect, or maybe too skinny, unhealthy or whatever, because that's the expectation that we've set for what beauty is. And they're now being held to a standard as a beginner of, if you want to do this professionally, you have to be that, and you have to get there quick. It's kind of an unrealistic expectation because they're not being given that chance to grow. I kind of feel like maybe potentially that same thing is happening to musicians in this world of perfect studio recordings. Everything's fixed and dialed in. Even the live recordings are edited to be perfect. Are you seeing any of that with your students where they're kind of held to that expectation?
Well, I think it's kind of a two-sided story here, because when someone wants to study music, there's certain guidelines. There's a curriculum to get a degree. There's a curriculum to get to the next level. So I'm always encouraging my students to practice, and here's this mode, and here's this technique, and let's try this and this and this. And that's not necessarily part of what music is today. And as I'm studying songwriting, I look at the whole world of top line, and there's like 3 producers creating a track. They send it out to 30 different top liners. Whoever sends them the best verse, chorus. Sometimes they pick this person's chorus, this person's verse, and then they give it to an artist to record. And then there's like 10 people in the mix to share the wealth from the song. Mm-hmm. And then once the song is recorded, then they use Melodyne on the vocal track, and nothing is just recorded and released. I mean, it's all just perfected and whittled down to this beautiful thing that comes out. So as far as what I'm doing, teaching guitar on a real, like my as far as a teacher, my priority is to make sure my guitar players know how to improvise and know how to communicate and know the ins and outs of theory and music and stuff like that. But then as far as releasing music and stuff like that, the big hits are the ones that are molded together in this weird way. So I'm kind of disconnected from that process in a way. Sure. So I'm not really teaching. I mean, I want to teach kids to be successful and to go after their careers. And I teach them there is so much space in the musical realm for you to have a career. Mm-hmm. You may not necessarily be the biggest superstar and play all the stadiums in the world, but you can work and be fulfilled in this environment. So it's kind of a really difficult thing, because I want to be true to my own self and the craft of guitar, and, but that's not necessarily commercial. I don't know if that's answering the question, but it's a really weird place to be right now.
Yeah, I can understand that. I'm thinking in terms of like a student comes to you and says, I don't feel like I'm as good as these guys, or maybe they feel like they have to get there really fast if they have ever an intention of competing in the more commercial world, because
Oh,
what they're
wow.
seeing, everything is so polished, you know?
Well, for me, I mean, I do struggle with this because I'm never going to be the person that's going to strive to be the best.
Mm.
I'm not. I'm just always constantly looking at where I am today. I give myself 100% for what I have today, and my 100% today may not be the 100 that I have tomorrow. But I know a lot of my friends they're always like, oh, well, you're better than him, and I'm better than this person, and they're better than that. And to me, I suffer from anxiety. If I live in that realm, I'm not going to survive. So I constantly am telling my students, you are good enough. You are worthy. You just keep doing what you do, and you find what you love. You find the sound you want to create, and it is good enough. It's a battle. This is a brutal world right now.
It really is, and very
admit.
cutthroat at times, depending on, you know, how far you get, or if you start working with like an outside producer and a record company and that sort of thing. I've always thought if you write things that feel good to you, and you write them honestly, and you don't overthink them too much, like not from okay, music theory states I have to do this way. You know, right. I think if you're just writing naturally and you write things that feel good, maybe a shocking transition here and there isn't a bad thing. But I think if you're writing from the heart, I think there's other people that will pick up on that. If you can find a way to cut through the noise of everything that's out there and get it out to people, give them an opportunity to hear it, I think you have a chance of finding a fan base. I think it's when you try to overthink too much and say, well, I just played an A, so the next note should be this, or I should, you know, that's when I think you start. But I think those things, to have those tools is important, because when you do get stuck, you're like, I just don't know what to do here. You know, what's a guideline, or what's, you know, the norm or something like that. I think theory can be a great thing, but I think it can also be like a block as well. You know, we can start generating too many things that sound the same because we're all following that same methodology.
Well, I always teach my songwriting students, the main thing is how to get unstuck. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not saying this is the rule for making the perfect song. It's never that. It's saying this is a way to start. This is a way to keep moving. And here's more ideas. Like, just keep delving into that. Find your creative spot. Find the place where you can be you. Yeah. And going back to the grunge, I mean, how bold and brave and audacious were they to say, I'm going to do something that is so different from everything that's out there. And I'm just going to be myself. And somehow it took off. I mean, how often do we get to do that?
Yeah, I total props for that, because and to the record companies and the agents that found them and said, hey, this is kind of cool and different. I think this is let's do something with it, instead of just going like they did with the Beatles. No. Right. Look at you, long-haired hippies.
Lots of no's.
Yeah, so I think that was great. I see we're kind of running out of time here. So John, how about your final thoughts on grunge? How do you feel about it? Will you give it a chance? Where are you at with it now?
Well, like I said before, I think, you know, I'm kind of, I guess I would say like indifferent, I guess kind of sounds, rude, but I would say like, it's not in my wheelhouse. I mean, there are a lot of styles of music that, you know, I don't align with, or I either don't know about or never gave a chance. Doesn't mean that I hate them, or, you know, I loathe them or wish anything bad on them. That was my thought process when I was a kid. But that's because in my mind, grunge killed hair metal, which we know is like, you know, we could do part 2 on that, you know, whether, you know, that's true or not, which, I mean, I would think now it's not entirely true. I mean, there are many different factors, but I would say, like I did before, that if, you know, if one of you guys, like, you know, sent me like a Spotify playlist of like, you know, try these, you know, songs from that era, like I would give them a chance. And I think that I'm sure that I would find something that I liked, because, you know, I had said about, you know, hair metal, which, I mean, back when we were listening to it, I think it was just called hard rock. You know, I think these terms came later, but I just remember thinking, you know, when you strip away like all the, you know, the makeup and the image and everything like that, all you have left is the songs and the production, you know, even if the production can be, you know, tied to the time. So, I mean, it's just like, if you're just listening truly with your ears, you know, it's all music, and whatever you like is is going to be that way. It's not the hairspray or the lipstick or whatever that, or the flannel shirt that makes the music any good. So, I would say, based on that, I would probably give it a try. Like I said, if somebody was trying to sway me, I'd listen. And like I said, I'm familiar because I didn't grow up like, in a bubble. Like, I had heard some of this stuff. So, I am familiar with it. And as Derek was talking about listening to music, nostalgically before. And some of it, like it or not, does hold a certain kind of nostalgia because, that was, I could tie it to different points in my life back then, regardless. So.
And to further your point, John, when I met Roger Glover, I was talking to him about a symphony that I had written. And I said, in a way, Deep Purple had a big influence on this, between the way that a couple of the instruments interact with each other was very similar to the way that John Lord and Ritchie Blackmore would play together, kind of play off each other and, kind of have a little bit of a competitive side, but work together at the same time. And he just looked at me and he said, it's all rock and roll. and it didn't really hit me at first, but a while later it did. It's kind of like, music is just music. This song is done this way and that song is done that way. And it really kind of doesn't matter what you classify it as. If you like a song, you like a song. If there's something in it for you, it doesn't really matter what label it's under. You're either going to like it or you're not. And kind of like people, except I tend to like music more.
And think about it from the point of view too, of like how the Deep Purple podcast, how we founded that was on that idea is that here was a band that splintered off into like, the Deep Purple family, as we call it. And they like all these guys with the core guys with all different musicians over the years did so many different projects and albums and styles of music that weren't even like the same. It's like you had Glenn Hughes would do like a funk disco type of thing, and Richie did his medieval thing, and then he got into pop, and Ian Gillan was doing the kind of a jazz fusion thing, and then 5 years later he's in Black Sabbath. So it's like you could go on and on, the concerto and all the stuff that John Lord did. So it's when you look at it that way, and then you would look at like the umbrella of like what grunge music is under, I'm sure that there's got to be that there as well.
I agree. And Juli and Derek, I'll ask you guys to do something for us. If you would send me maybe 5 songs that you would say, if you wanted to get me into this style of music, send me 5 songs. I'll put those in the show notes for everybody who's maybe not as familiar, wants to give it a chance, or even just curious to see what you would pick. And then John and I will listen to them and we'll see how we feel about them. But I think I would love to take a dive into it if I just knew where to start, so that I wouldn't walk into it with that, oh God, I got to sit through this kind of attitude, because I really don't want to feel that way. But that's, when John first said that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the music I didn't like, because it was, so if you would do that, I would appreciate it and put it in the show notes. Derek, what are your final thoughts on the subject of grunge?
I think a couple of things that have struck me that Juli and John have said, and that bring some things to mind here. One is many years ago, I had someone in the kind of design and photography world tell me for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And it was in that context of photography and all design and printing, all that type of stuff. But I have found I'm a marketer professionally. And so I love consumer behavior. And I think that applies to culture. And we were talking about that transition from kind of that late 80s, very early 90s, kind of where rock was, metal, hard rock, glam, whatever you want to call it, to grunge. And that's what happened, right? It swung the other way. And actually some of the conversations we were just having about where kind of some pop music is right now, it makes me wonder, like, I feel at some point we're going to see something swing the other way to, like, whether it's going to be acoustic, whether it's going to be some sort of like really kind of grungy, like guitar driven type of stuff. Something's going to come out of the other way. I think the other thing that when I think about grunge, it's hard for me to separate in my head grunge specifically from the greater kind of explosion of music in the 90s. Because it wasn't just grunge, right? And if we're really talking about the topic of like, did grunge kill hair metal? I'm like, I don't know if it killed it, but probably like it was already struggling, if you will, because of all the things we've talked about. But then grunge came along, that was the opposite of it. But then the real rise of hip hop and rap during that same time period, and it feels like music splintered. And to think that in 1990, you've got hair metal kind of still kind of dominating the airwaves, especially in the rock and roll world. Then grunge came along, and then by 1999, we're entering the Napster age of things, right? And within that decade, how quickly things changed in the splintering of music and kind of the equalizing of genres, that you could just bounce between them. And to hear Juli talk about that, and just doesn't matter. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself. You can just listen to whatever you want. And I've got a Amazon Echo sitting over here that I could ask it to play whatever I want across any genre of music. And it's just makes it so accessible. So for me, I think it's the other last thing I'll say is genres. You mentioned this, Scott, of like, we tend to do that. We tend to classify things, and it's a human behavior, and it's a shortcut, and it's about safety, and it's about it's really the psychological safety part of it, of saying, if I can categorize this, I know what to do with it. And there's a tendency to try to be very neat about that as people, as humans. And it can be challenging to say, I'm going to change my assumptions about how I've categorized things. And so love the idea. Happy to send you some songs of the grunge genre to see if break that out. That'll be a fun challenge to see if change some minds here, as well as actually I owe myself. I need to get better acquainted with Uriah Heep. I am not familiar enough with them as a music fan, so I will do that as a favor to myself as well.
If only somebody did a podcast on them.
Yes.
And currently, for those of you that are listening, the podcast is on hold. I've covered everything that they've recorded, which is what I set out to do. They have not released album 25 yet. They are waiting, I believe, until the 50th anniversary tour, which they're now going on their 53rd year. They're finally able to. They just started the 50th anniversary tour. They just did their first show. So I'm hoping that once they've done that tour, then the new album will come out and they'll start touring for that. So then the show will pick back up, covering that, maybe do some interviews with the band again, which would be a lot of fun. Juli, you get the final word. What do you have to say about how you're feeling about grunge these days? Because it's really kind of like it still exists, but it's really out of the focus now.
Well, I think in fashion, it seems to be coming back in. People are wearing Doc Martens again, which is all right. I would say in 2022, none of us are obligated to like songs, to dislike songs. It happened. The 90s did come. It changed a lot of things. All of my favorite bands ended up not touring probably for a decade, right? But here we are again. I just got to see Motley Crue, Joan Jett, Def Leppard. Was that all 4 of them? Who else was on that thing? Motley Crue.
I don't know. It wasn't Poison.
Poison, yeah.
So how exciting. There's still so many people in love with that style, and I think if Pearl Jam, they still have a market. Look how many albums they have. I have to admit, I haven't listened to all of them, and I have not listened to all of Def Leppard's albums either, as much as I do love them. But what I'm just always drawn to the 80s music. I don't know if it's just because I listened to it and I was such a loyal fan, and I like you guys were saying, being able to go to the shows and have that be such an instrumental part of who I am and my childhood, it's just always going to resonate with me.
Well, they've started up again now that we're further away from the dangers of where we were with COVID. They do a lot of lost 80s shows throughout the country during the year. Like 3 or 4 bands will get together and do 5 or 6 dates. But in September, when they end their tour season, they all get together. The majority of them get together and they play here in Vegas, down off of Fremont Street. I've been twice, seen A Flock of Seagulls, Berlin.
Wow. They do cruises too.
They do cruises, yeah. Yeah, but it's with those and with the individual shows, it's like there's 3 or 4 bands that will do those, but there's like 12 bands that come together to do the final show here in Vegas. And it's just amazing. I mean, when Berlin did Take My Breath Away, some really large muscled guy who pretty much could probably step on me and crush my head was carrying her around through the crowd on his shoulder while she sang that song. It was just like such a surreal,
Amazing.
if we all still had lighters, they would have all been up, up in the air. So that's something to consider for 80s fans to come out and see that show. But yeah, I really I am looking forward to digging into this kind of music again, because I'm sure there's some stuff there that I would like, especially now that I'm a lot more open-minded than I was back in the 90s, where I was like, nope, it's Deep Purple, White Snake, Black Sabbath, Uriah Heep, those are my bands and I don't need anything else, and some 80s tunes, So thank you guys very much for coming on the show and talking about this. It's been very enlightening for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the listeners.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun. It was a pleasure to meet you all.
Yeah, same here.
You too.
Except for me, because we've known each other forever. and I will add, the way that Julie described herself in high school is exactly the way that she was. The only difference is that she had taller hair.
Me too.
For that to come back.
Yes. Yeah. It's not going to help me any now, but yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys, thank you very much. I will add your song list to the show notes, and this episode will air on Wednesday at 1 a.m. Pacific time. And I'll send you guys out the links and all that too. Derek, I don't have your email, so shoot that over to me, and then I'll have a contact with you. And thank you guys so much. We'll have to do this again at some point and see, maybe do like a follow-up and see how John and I feel after the fact of having a new experience.
Yeah.
That'd
That'll be interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you. Oh, and it is basically going to be John Mottola month for all of September, since our Aerosmith Toys in the Attic review basically spans 3 episodes. So now I may cut into that with another episode of something else if it comes up. But yeah, so it's going to be John Mottola month. So then, and you can listen to him on the Deep Purple podcast. I've got links for Julie in the show notes for all the wonderful things that she does, her online classes, her videos that she does with her husband, John, just some really amazing stuff. So check all that out. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week on the HaskinCast Podcast.